Hey everyone, Chang here and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to do something a little evil. I'm going to take something that's fairly simple and make it super complicated. Just for the sake of making it complicated. That's evil, right? Today we're going to go into details about negative numbers. That's right, I'm going to ruin negative number for you. After this video, you will understand where negative number comes from, how it relates to subtraction, and hopefully, after the excruciating details, you will understand and avoid some of the common mistakes when dealing with negative numbers. Let's start off with this. In a previous video, I went over the rules of algebra. Each rule has its own specific purpose, but we're going to focus on specifically one rule today, and that rule is the additive inverse. Well, let's remind ourselves what the additive inverse is. It basically states that for every number, there exists another number that's the equal and opposite, such that when you add them together, the final answer is 0. Well, yes, that basically gives us negative numbers. Now, I want you to notice the wording. The rule specifically states equal and opposite. So even though they are equal, they're exact opposite of each other. Positive numbers and negative numbers are exact opposite of each other. So for example, if you have 1 and you add it with negative 1, you get 0. If you have 10 million and you add it with negative 10 million, you get 0. Yes, I know that already. Good. But I want you guys to notice something. Yes, we have our original problem. We have our 1 plus negative 1 equals 0. We have our 10 million plus negative 10 million equals 0. But actually, we can write two new problems. We can write 1 minus 1 equals 0, 10 million minus 10 million equals 0. And we can actually do that with any number. We can say, for example, 5 plus negative 5 equals 5 minus 5. 62 plus negative 62 equals 62 minus 62, right? And it works for any number. Well, from this logic, we can actually use it with different numbers. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just say, for example, you have 5 plus negative 4. That is the same as 5 minus 4. Or we have 37 plus negative 20. Once again, that's the same as 37 minus 20. And we can use that with any combination of numbers. So from here, we actually see something very interesting. The idea of subtraction is that it is just another way of adding negative numbers. Now here's where it gets a little confusing, and this is where I'm going to need your help for that. So what I need you to do is temporarily forget everything you know about negative numbers. Forget all of it. That means how it's introduced. Maybe you were introduced to it by money, how someone owes you money, or so on and so forth. Forget all of that, and we're just going to start with this. We have used numbers for so long, so quickly and so instinctively that we never really take the time to sit down and think about what numbers really are. They are there to just help us keep track of how much or how many of something. That is it. Nothing else. It has nothing to do with the socks, the money, the height, the shoes, nothing. It is just there to help us keep track. And since that is the case, I want to bring in something else. Here is a number line. Notice that all the positive numbers are on the right. All the negative numbers are on the left. That is it. Plain and simple, nothing complicated. Now, when we talk about, for example, the number 2, it is just 2 parts to the right. When we talk about, for example, negative 2, it is just 2 parts to the left. Now it gets a little more interesting. When you add them together, they actually cancel each other out. Well, this actually works for 2 different numbers. For example, let's say we have 4 plus negative 1. What would it look like? You would have 4 parts on the right, so each and every one of those single parts, 4 of them on the right, and you would have 1 part on the left. That is the negative 1. Now, when you add them together, you would just get the 1 part on the left and cancel it with 1 part on the right. And the remainder of it, what's left over, is 3. So the answer is 3. Complicated for nothing! Yes, I know, but bear with me. I wanted to specifically bring in the number line so that you guys can see and visualize negative numbers. Here's where it gets a little more interesting, a little more useful. Remember, at this point, we're pretty comfortable with the idea that if you multiply any number with 1, you get that exact same number. So if you multiply 5 times 1, well, you get 5. If you multiply 8 times 1, you get 8. And that's easy. Now also remember, from the number line, every single positive numbers are just numbers on the right side of 0. Every single numbers that are negative are just on the left side of 0. Well, we know when we multiply any number by 1, it's positive, so it stays on the right. But when we multiply by -1, that's where it gets interesting. Remember that any number times 1 is just a number itself. It doesn't change. Negative means that it is equal and opposite. So therefore, when you multiply by -1, it's actually the same number, but on the negative side. So if you have 5 times -1, you get -5. If you have 8 times -1, you get -8. Now that is even more interesting. Think of it this way. Every time, no matter what number you're using, if you multiply it by -1, you are flipping it across the number line, across 0 to the opposite side. So if you have a positive number and you multiply it by -1, you're flipping it to the negative side. Well, guess what? If you have a negative number and you multiply it by -1, by that logic, it must do something. It will flip it over to the positive side. And this is where it gets really confusing. So let's go over some examples. Here we have -1 times 2. Well, the answer is fairly simple. It's -2. That's easy. What about this one? We have -2 times -1. Let's take a second to think about this. Got it? Cool. So basically, at this point, we have -2 times -1. Any number times 1 is just a number itself. But this is not 1, this is -1. So -2 stays the same, dealing with the 1, but the negative. Negative means equal and opposite. Well, at this point, -2, we're going to get the equal and opposite of it, which gives us what? +2, because we're just flipping it across the number line, flipping it across to 0, just to get to the positive version of -2. Let's look at this one. The format's a little weird. We have the negative sign outside of a parentheses with -2 inside it. Well, guess what? This is basically a popular and tricky way of writing the previous problem. Let me rewrite it. This problem right here is basically saying -1 times -2. People got lazy, decided not to put the 1 in front of the negative sign. But basically it means -1 times -2. So the answer is the same as the previous. Guess what? It is 2. Now here's the hardest one. And this is the one where a lot of people get confused and make mistake. We have -3 times -2. Well, we don't actually have a -1. What do? We're multiplying two negative numbers. Well, if it helps, let's rewrite it. Let's leave -3 alone for a bit and just work with -2. Well, we know that -2 is basically the same thing as -1 times 2. Okay, great. Let's rewrite it. -3 times -1 times 2. Okay, well, let's break it down even further. We're done with that part. We're going to work with -3. We know that -3 is basically -1 times 3. Well, if that's the case, we can rewrite it and reorganize it. So we have -1 times -1 times 3 times 2. Well, the -1 means that you're flipping it across the number line. You flip it twice, you basically get the same thing. So the -1 actually cancels each other out. It goes away. So what you're left with is 3 times 2. In that case, well, 3 times 2 is 6. Now that was easy. Simple, straightforward, not too bad, not too complicated. Kindergarten stuff. You try it.
1.
Just a keynote, I will have the answers in the description for those of you guys who are curious and want to check your answers.
3.
Well, thanks for sticking with me until the end of this video. Let's summarize what we went over. So from the rules of algebra, basically the additive inverse, we get negative numbers. We also know that from there, that negative numbers are just equal and opposite of positive numbers. And with that, we actually realize that adding negative numbers and subtraction are basically the same thing. Now, we represent the positive and negative numbers on a number line. Since they are equal and opposite, we had all the positive number on the right hand side of 0 and all the negative numbers on the left hand side of 0. And from here, we realize that every time we multiply any number by -1, we are just flipping it across the number line, across 0 to the opposite side. And from there, we actually realize that we can flip a number across the number line as many times as we want, as long as we multiply the number by that exact amount of -1s. And that gives us something interesting, that if we multiply -1 an even amount of time, it basically cancels each other out. Right? You flip it once and then you flip it back again, you have the original position. You can do that 2, 4, 100 times and it will still be in the same position. Now lastly, please like, comment, and subscribe if you feel like taking a simple topic like negative numbers, going into details and making it super complicated is evil enough. I really can't do an evil laughter, but let's go with Mr. Burns. Excellent.